Thank you so much for joining us for CBN News Today. I'm Ephraim Graham.
And I'm Charlene Israel. Much of the country is bracing for a major winter storm. It's taking aim from the Gulf Coast to the Carolinas. The snow, ice, and freezing rain are set to wreak havoc on regions already battered by last week's storm and dangerous cold. The monster winter storm is dumping snow and ice from southern Texas to the southeast today. The National Weather Service has issued winter storm watches and warnings from Virginia all the way down to the Gulf Coast. Across the country, road crews are trying to prepare for the worst, but many communities are running out of road salt.
Lots of spinouts. The roads are real icy due to the temperatures, and the salt doesn't work in these temperatures too well. It gives you traction, but that's only where the salt is. It's not really melting anything.
Forecasters warn of record-breaking temperatures and conditions.
Two major concerns with this air mass. Number one, the unbearable cold across the north. This is a dangerously cold air mass. Now, this cold setting the stage for a major winter storm in the southeast. Don't get a lot of these across the region, and it's going to be bad across the I-10 for travelers. Icy mix, sleet and freezing rain.
Most of the country is going to have a frigid February. It'll be centered over the center part of the United States. And lots of storminess and lots of snow and cold for the United States. It's going to be the coldest winter probably since the winters in the late 70s.
Blinding blizzard-like conditions forced the cancellation of hundreds of airline flights, leaving thousands stranded at airports across the country. Chicago is like a polar deep freeze with minus 16-degree temps this morning. In New Jersey, ice jams are clogging the Delaware River. A Coast Guard cutter made its way down the river to try and move the process along. In Ohio, giant snowballs called snow rollers formed across the area. This Ohio man says it's one of the worst winters he has seen in his 30-plus years of snowplowing.
It's been pretty brutal for the last couple of weeks. Everybody's working a lot of hours, putting a lot of time in.
Meanwhile, schools in Chicago, Minneapolis, and St. Paul are closed again. A big headache for frustrated parents.
Although it's cold, I really don't understand why CBS is closed.
It just throws everyone into chaos, and it doesn't need to be. They could just go into school, stay in school. They don't need to have outdoor recess.
The extreme wintry weather is expected to last through Wednesday.
The president addresses the nation in his State of the Union address tonight. Joining us now is CBN White House correspondent Jennifer Wishon. Jennifer, a recent ABC News Washington Post poll shows diminishing faith in the president. In fact, only 37% believe he is making the right decisions for the country. So is he already a lame duck?
Ephraim, I would say almost. We have the midterm elections coming up in November, a chance for Republicans to really make some gains in the U.S. Senate. And then, shortly after that, the attention is going to turn to the 2016 presidential race and the men and women vying to take the president's job. But I do think there is a window this spring, summer, and fall for the president to, work with members of Congress to try and move some of his initiatives down the field. The question is there the appetite? And we haven't seen that there has been an appetite for this White House to really try to make those deals with Congress.
Well, we know that he's relied on speeches in the past, but outside of health care reform, many would say he's accomplished very little. Is anyone listening anymore when it comes to the speeches?
Well, certainly anytime the President of the United States speaks, the world listens. But I think his audience is learning from history. I mean, you mentioned healthcare reform. We see that, that's no longer a lofty promise. It is now a reality that in some ways has been atrocious. And I think members of Congress and the American people now see that, some of these promises, and the president is excellent at making speeches, but he's not good at following up with those promises. So maybe people will be listening with one ear open.
Well, the Washington Post says that he plans to bypass Congress and use more executive actions. What policy initiatives will he pursue, do you think, through executive action?
Yeah, the president has made it very clear the past few weeks. He has a pen and he's not afraid to use it to take executive action. This speech, much to the president's dismay, is going to be about the economy, the still sluggish economy that has really plagued this president. And so I think when we see him trying to take these executive actions or taking these executive actions, it's going to be targeted targeted actions to try and improve the economy. And we've seen him doing that the past few weeks, trying to bolster American manufacturing, helping to set up a manufacturing hub in North Carolina that partners, some of the cutting edge technology taking place at some of the universities in North Carolina with the private sector. We've seen him setting up these promise zones, which were actually something he spelled out in last year's State of the Union address, which encourages private investment in some of America's most economically distressed areas. So I think we're going to see him trying to take some targeted action that will finally, put some oomph behind some of these promises that he's been making about improving the economy.
Well, Jennifer, I have to ask that if he's going to push the pen, will that not hurt his relationship with Congress and create even more ill will between them?
Absolutely, it will. But I think at this point in his presidency, kind of nearing the middle of his second term, he's worried about legacy. And the president really wants to be able to leave office and say that he improved the economy and say that he, was able to move the ball on immigration reform and other things. And so I think at this point, maybe he's not going to be so worried about that ill will on the other end of Pennsylvania Avenue.
All right, Jennifer Wishon, the president delivers the State of the Union tonight. We know you'll be listening. We'll be waiting to hear what you say.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Most Americans still have a negative view of Obamacare. A new Associated Press GFK poll shows 2/3 of Americans say things still aren't going well. That is down from 76% last month. 71% have encountered problems when trying to sign up. Only 40% report having success with the site. Just 27% of Americans say they back the law, while 42% oppose it and 30% are neutral. Republican Senator Ted Cruz says the problems with Obamacare should be a key focus of the president's address tonight.
Millions of people across the country have seen now why we were standing and fighting, because Obamacare is a disaster. And for the State of the Union, one of the things President Obama really ought to do is look in the TV camera and say to the over 5 million Americans all across this country who've had their health insurance canceled because of Obamacare, to look in the camera and say, I'm sorry. I told you if you like your health insurance plan, you can keep it. I told you if you like your doctor, you can keep your doctor. And that wasn't true. I'm sorry.
And Cruz says if President Obama is really sorry, then he should do something to fix the problems with Obamacare that have hurt millions of Americans.
The state of New Jersey is ready to welcome thousands of football fans for the Super Bowl this weekend, but authorities are also gearing up for a darker side of the big event, an influx of human traffickers. Monday, a congressional committee held a hearing on human trafficking at major sporting events and what is being done to combat the problem. Officials also heard the testimony of a sex trafficking survivor.
Within hours of running away, I was forced into prostitution on the streets and in the casino hotels and motels of Atlantic City, New Jersey. 36 hours later, I was arrested by police and treated like a criminal.
The only standard that fits the crime of human trafficking is zero tolerance, and it must be vigorously and faithfully enforced by arrests of those engaged in this nefarious trade, modern-day slavery.
The average age of entry into forced prostitution for child victims in the U.S. is 13 to 14 years old. Congressman Smith emphasized the government must respond more aggressively to end sex trafficking.
Ukraine's government has taken steps to end a potential nationwide uprising. Early today, the country's parliament repealed a package of hardline anti-protest laws that set off violent clashes in the streets. A few hours before the vote, the highly unpopular prime minister resigned his post. President Viktor Yanukovych hopes those moves will placate the protesters who are calling for his resignation and new elections. It was Yanukovych's decision in November to scrap a deal with the European Union in favor of closer ties with Russia that led to weeks of peaceful protests. Then 2 weeks ago, the government cracked down, passing a batch of harsh laws to end the protests. But that only sparked violent confrontations between police and protesters, and at least 3 protesters have been killed. In recent days, the protesters stormed government buildings in Kiev and other cities across the country. Evangelical leader Sergei Timchenko says while some Christians disagree about their role in the protests, the crisis has brought many churches together.
There is some division between people, sometimes in one church or between different churches. At the same time, there are more and more unity Orthodox Church and Greek Catholic Church and some other churches that usually are not together, but now they feel unity in prayer and unity in God's call to be together.
CBN's George Thomas will be filing reports from Kiev later this week. Keep watching the CBN News channel for those reports.
Syrian Christian leaders are asking the U.S. to help preserve Christianity in the war-torn country. On Monday at the Heritage Foundation, a delegation from Syria said, without help, there will be no more Christians in Syria. Hundreds of thousands of Syrian Christians have already been driven from their homes by radical Islamic rebels, and the churches and monasteries in their communities have been destroyed. The delegation of Syrian clergy also appealed for more U.S. aid for refugees.
Coming up, never again. Millions around the world pause to reflect on Holocaust Remembrance Day. A Malaysian church was attacked with firebombs early Monday. Authorities say 2 men on motorcycles threw Molotov cocktails into the compound of the Assumption Church in Penang. No one was injured. Officials believe it's connected to a long-running dispute over the use of the word Allah by non-Muslims. Malaysian Christians use the word Allah to refer to the God of the Bible. The attack came after someone hung banners outside of 5 churches reading, "Allah is great, Jesus is the Son of Allah." The churches said they had nothing to do with the banner.
Using bombs and heavy guns, Islamic militants killed at least 99 people in an attack on a Christian village in northeast Nigeria. Villagers say the attackers stormed a Roman Catholic church during Sunday morning service, spraying the congregation with bullets and setting off bombs. The terrorists killed dozens inside the church and held others hostage during a 5-hour siege. They also burned down hundreds of homes. Officials say it is one of the highest death tolls in attacks by extremists. The militant Boko Haram has not taken credit for the attack, but it's been waging a war against the government in the north.
Supporters of Pastor Saeed Abedini say an Iranian official recently offered a glimmer of hope the imprisoned American could be set free. The American Center of Law and Justice reports Iran's foreign minister suggested clemency could be an option for Abedini. In an interview with CNN, the foreign minister replied to a direct question about Pastor Abedini by saying, "We have various clemency measures in Iran that can be introduced, happened in the past, can be introduced again in these cases." He quickly followed up by saying the decision is not up to him, but to Iran's judiciary.
From Poland to the United Nations and Israel, millions around the globe marked International Holocaust Remembrance Day Monday. Ceremonies commemorated the deaths of 6 million Jews in what has been called history's greatest crime. Here's Chris Mitchell now from Jerusalem.
The world remembered the Holocaust, but for survivors, the memories never fade.
There is not one day when we don't think about the events hidden in our minds. There is not one day. It always returns. Dreams return. We still hear in our dreams dogs barking, those German commands.
In Auschwitz, more than 50 Knesset members joined Holocaust survivors and world leaders to mark the liberation of the worst of the Nazi death camps. They shared memories of the place where Nazis murdered more than 1 million Jews, where life expectancy of those arriving was sometimes measured in minutes.
Dogs were barking, and there was a terrible smell. We didn't know what the smell was. We could only see the chimneys with flames a couple of meters high. We didn't know that it was the crematorium.
At the UN, filmmaker Steven Spielberg shared the hope of Holocaust survivors.
Survivors and witnesses often say that their dearest hope, the hope that helped keep them alive, was to be heard and to be believed and to be understood.
Spielberg made Schindler's List. The movie told the story of Oskar Schindler, who saved thousands of Jews during the Holocaust, like Rena Finder.
Oskar Schindler has proven, like a shining star, that there is always something somebody can do.
On International Holocaust Remembrance Day, over and over around the world, whether at Auschwitz, the UN, or here in Jerusalem at Yad Vashem, Israel's National Holocaust Museum, the refrain was the same: never again.
When we say that phrase, never again, it shouldn't just be something that we say without thinking. It should mean that we are taking an active stance, that we don't want something like that to happen ever again.
It's important to come here and to give testimony that we were prisoners. It should be a lesson. Such events shouldn't happen again.
As we pass the torch of memory to the next generation and the generations after, we want them to remember. We want them to remember what most people would like to forget. And forgetting is dangerous.
Theirs were journeys into the Holocaust. They cannot emerge from it, and neither can the world until there are no more genocides, until the unthinkable becomes impossible.
Chris Mitchell, CBN News, Jerusalem.
Up next, he may not be James Bond, but he's still on a mission to save England. How this hooligan is trying to protect his country from the enemy within. Britain is in a fight for its survival against radical Islam.
But those who are fighting to save Britain's future aren't considered heroes. Instead, they're publicly ridiculed. Adil Hurd has that story now from England.
Enough's enough.
For years, he has been Britain's bad boy, a hero to many. The left in Britain labeled him a racist and a Nazi. He is Stephen Lennon, also known as Tommy Robinson, former head of the English Defence League. Tommy Robinson was a pseudonym he adopted in the early days of the group, when it was risky to be a member. I interviewed Lennon before he shocked Britain by announcing that he was leaving the English Defence League. The EDL began in the working-class town of Luton in 2009, when militant Muslims protested against British soldiers returning from Iraq. From there, it grew to become a self-styled defender of democracy against the spread of radical Islam in Britain. The EDL was able to turn out thousands of supporters at its demonstrations, tough men from the working class. You have some rough-looking guys at your demonstrations.
Of course, yeah. Working class communities in this country are rough communities. It was never going to be doctors and nurses that stand up to militant Islam on the streets of this country. When we first formed, the response against us was a very violent response by members of the Islamic community who come out, and images were sent across this country in national newspapers and in media of our supporters on the floor getting their heads kicked in. Now, when we went to our next demonstration, how many female 30-year-old school teachers are going to come out and oppose militant Islam? There's a certain sort of man that decides to dig in the trenches on the front line to fight for our Queen and our country in faraway fields against forces of Sharia in Afghanistan and Iraq. It's the same sort of man that's willing to protect here at home.
But after years of trying to keep extremists and Nazis out of the EDL, Lennon finally threw in the towel and left, as he explained on BBC's Newsnight programme.
I'd battled for 4 years to keep racists, Nazis, extremists out of this movement. I battled and dedicated my life to it, and they were invited back. And I felt let down by the people that in the organisation that were in positions, the same people that are calling me a traitor now, that were in positions invited Nazis to stand with them in the street. One of my offences is for knocking out one of these Nazis. In the early days of the English Defence League, purity comes with time in any organisation. When we formed, we're a nationalistic organisation. It attracted the wrong sorts as well as the right sorts. And it took us years of battling these wrong sorts and these Nazi elements to get rid of them, to let them know we stand with Israel, we fully support Israel.
The other charge against Lennon that he hears over and over is that he's a racist.
Please tell me how I'm a racist bigot. Please explain to me. Please explain. Couldn't explain. Because you are. No, I'm not a racist bigot because you tell me I'm a racist bigot. No. This left-wing and far-left view and agenda that anyone who has a different opinion to you is a racist or bigot is the reason that grooming gangs have been facilitated in this country. And people have not been allowed to say how they feel because you're a racist. Bang, bang, beaten back down. And then if you're a racist, you lose your job. My goddaughter is black. My niece is mixed race. So Englishness is not about the colour of your skin.
Lennon warns that British authorities are creating the conditions for civil war by both allowing the spread of radical Islam and restricting freedom of speech to criticize and protest against it.
So we have this democracy where we've actually had people, some of our members have been given 10-year ASBOs not to protest about Islam. Really? This is the land of democracy. If you're disgusted at what's happening in this country, what are you supposed to do? Because through democracy, when you're angry, you channel that frustration through peaceful protest. You take that right away from people, what are they going to do? They're going to be responsible for creating monsters. The last thing we want is a war in this country. But it's the inevitable outcome to the way the country's going. Now, the British people are not going to sit back and take much more.
Even though he has left the EDL, Lenin says it hasn't changed his opinion that radical Islam is still the biggest threat Britain faces.
Previous prime ministers, whether it be William Gladstone, said there'll never be peace on this earth so long as we have the Quran. It's an accursed and violent book. Then we have Winston Churchill, who said Islam and a man is like rabies and a dog. And then we have David Cameron, who says Islam's religion of peace. What's changed? Because the book hasn't changed.
Now that the man known as Tommy Robinson has left the EDL, there are fears that it could splinter and become what it was always accused of being, a violent, dangerous collection of neo-Nazis and white supremacists. Lenin says he's chosen a new strategy of working with moderate Muslims in the hope that more people will listen to his message. But even though he's left the English Defence League, Stephen Lennon still lives every day under a death threat.
Am I scared of the death threats? People want to kill me and attacks against me, etc. Yeah, I am. Of course I am. I wouldn't be human if I wasn't. But I am terrified for the entire next generation of this country and for this country's history, its culture, its identity. It's all under attack.
Dale Hurd, CBN News in Luton, England.
You know, Ephraim, finally, while most people are trying to avoid the flu, some are actually getting paid thousands of dollars to get it.
A government study is paying people $3,000 each to become infected with influenza. They're researching why some are more immune to the flu, even with a vaccine. Volunteers are kept in isolation and their symptoms are checked on a daily basis.
I experienced a little head congestion, sinus pressure.
We can look at people, their immune system, and the flu, and understand those interactions so that hopefully we can learn new information that could help us improve vaccines in the future.
Researchers are hoping to conduct the study on up to 100 people over the course of the next year.
I would have to totally decline. I am so sorry.
It's going to take more than a few thousand.
Yeah, it's not. Well, that's going to do it for now on CBN News Today. You can find more of our exclusive coverage of the issues you care most about at cbnnews.com.
Take the time to tell us what you think about the stories you've seen here today. You can do that on Facebook or at CBN News on Twitter. Hope you join us again right here next time. Have a terrific Tuesday, everybody.